Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Luke Richardson, and today I will be presenting about the online disinhibition effects. Now, we all love to be online. It doesn't matter if we're old or young, or anywhere in between. There's something each and every generation can get out of the internet, and something we can enjoy. And one of those benefits, ever since the onset of intertextual communication via the internet has come about since the 1980s, is communication without having to see the person face to face. Good example of this would be social media messaging, texting, or anything else like that. Facebook Messenger, you name it. But as much good as these mediums of communication have brought us, there have been some drawbacks. And one scholar has come up with what he calls the online disinhibition effects. And there are 8 of them that I'd like to discuss today. Now, there are 8 of those, but I would like to talk about specifically just one today, and that would be soliplistic interjection. Now, you might be asking, what is soliplistic interjection? All of those are pretty large words, but that one seems to be definitely one of the bigger ones. So, soliplistic interjection, put rather simply, is a lack of face-to-face cues combined with textual communication that alters what we typically think of typical in communication patterns. So, what is typical in communication patterns? That's a good question. One of those would include non-verbal communication and signals. I'm using non-verbal signals right now as you watch this video, and some people would say that it's responsible from anywhere in between 45 to 80% of all implied meaning in communication. That is a lot. And we tend to lose out on that when we use other forms of communication where we don't really get to see face to face. And so what tends to happen, according to soliplistic interjection, is we like to project what we would assume of this other person based on what we know onto this person. So perhaps we may not know what their voice sounds like. We will oftentimes put a voice from our own head into theirs, and we assume that's what they sound like. Now, we have some remedies to this that have tried to get over the fact that we have not a lot of nonverbal communication, and soliplistic interjection tends to happen. Good example of these are emojis. We all love emojis, if we use more than 3 of them, that is. The problem is, emojis tend to be limited in both their usage and their applicability, because yes, there are thousands of them, but we don't really tend to use a lot of them. And the emojis can only do so much. The laughy face emoji doesn't really entail the same thing as me laughing right in front of you, because it's simply just not enough. Now, there are some positives and negatives of the lack of nonverbal communication and soliplistic interjection. There are some positives in this. One of them would be that there is less pressure when we are communicating face to face with somebody. There is not as much pressure to look and sound and act perfect. It's just what we're typing with our fingers or whatever it tends to be that we're communicating with. There's a lot less pressure when it comes to that. But some of the negatives are, and they are big, is that we're just missing vital parts of communication. We're missing anywhere between 40 to 80% of what we would get out of another person. And that's just simply too large of a gap to ignore. I'd also like to include a brief dissertation on a supporting theory that might help understand how some of these online disinhibition effects, specifically soliplistic interjection, tend to interact with some of the other theories. And a good example of that would be the expectancy violations theory. Now, expectancy violations theory has to do with the perceptions that we tend to bring into meeting someone for the first time and how they changed after interacting with them in real life. And that really interacts well with soliplistic interjection, because when we meet someone online versus in person, as I've talked about, we tend to like to interject our own thoughts and perceptions about what the person should sound like. For instance, I met someone who was from New York online, and naturally, when we were communicating over text, Snapchat, and Instagram, and other messaging platforms, she naturally sounded like she was from New York in my head. But when I met her for the first time, she sounded completely normal to me. She didn't sound New Yorker at all. And that is a good example of how my expectancies for that relationship were completely changed. In conclusion, while a lot of the online disinhibition effects can have some positives to them, they are oftentimes outweighed by the negative. While it can be helpful to have soliplistic interjection in an online relationship, as it helps fill in the gaps that we might not have noticed about that person based on what little information we can ascertain from knowing them online. But in the long term, it can be very harmful, especially if the relationship tends to move into the real world because of expectancy violation theory. Now, I challenge you to go out and see what you can find related to expectancy violations theory, soliplistic interjection, and some of the online and disinhibition effects in your communication and in others. Might be a fun challenge. Who knows? Anyway, thank you for listening, and I hope you continue to have a good day.